Welcome to Tita Talks. My name is Sonia Tita Puopolo, and I'm your host. It is a great privilege and pleasure to welcome author and filmmaker Helena Norberg-Hodge, a pioneer of the local economy movement. Through writing and public lectures on 3 continents, she has been promoting an economics of personal, social, and ecological well-being for more than 30 years. Helena is the founder and director of Local Futures in the International Alliance for Localization. And today we're talking about the healing power of personal, social, and ecological well-being, a self-care tool for you. Welcome to Tita Talks, Helena.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here.
We are so delighted that you're here with us. What did you do to care for yourself at home during the COVID-19 pandemic quarantine? And what are you doing now as we move forward?
I have found over the years that the best medicine is healthy food, and I've been taking quite a lot of natural supplements, a lot of herbal, antiviral mixtures, and also vitamins like zinc. And I also happen to take B12. So I think those supplements can also be very important. And then regular exercise. I'm just so lucky because I live in a very beautiful place. And during this whole COVID period, actually, we're on the sea in Byron Bay, and we've been watching the whales heading north and then now heading south. And it's such a beautiful reminder that a lot of nature has been healed, through the efforts of people. These are humpback whales, and they were down to only 800, and now they're up to about 30,000 in number. And we're seeing so many of them. And even just today, I saw about 10 whales. So that, and then I am not meditating as much as I often feel I should. But I have discovered that a type of light meditation that I do when I walk in nature, and also a chanting and humming, actually, I've now learned, this also stimulates the vagus nerve. Yeah. And so they're discovering all this new science is discovering that what ancient people did is so healing, because my learning came from this ancient culture, Tibetan culture, and their people were always chanting the mantra, Om Mani Padme Hum, even as they would speak to you. And I've now recently, having learned more about how important it is, I do more chanting. And even when I'm out gardening, I'll often be humming and chanting. And so I have not been doing regular sitting meditation, but I've been sometimes doing sort of a 10-minute sitting, but mainly I'm doing it in this way of gardening and walking out in nature, and then making sure that I don't allow the chattering mind to continue, that I really rest the mind and become more in tune with my body and with my whole self. So many incredibly beautiful and inspiring initiatives around the world that most people don't get to hear about in the media. And so we try to bring that together into a program online. And I managed to also persuade some people with a big name to join us, like Russell Brand and Brian Eno and Eve Ensler, who's calling herself Jane Goodall. So that was in combination with voices from every continent. Basically, what I'm doing and what I have been doing for more than 40 years is to try to show how the ancient indigenous cultures, like the Tibetan culture that I came to know very well in Ladakh or West Tibet, their way of life was actually embodying and living the Buddhist teachings. The teachings are that everything in life is interconnected, that we are part of a web of relationships, And that if we cling to sort of an analytical, conceptual framing of reality, and we believe the words really do correspond to a static and separate reality, you know, I am I, you are you, and the tree out there is the tree, and these are all separate, like in a machine, have completely their own identity.
Right.
Buddhism teaches that no, actually, we are in this web of interrelatedness, and nothing has that separate or static identity. Now, what I came to realize was that those teachings were reinforcing a way of life. And the teachings didn't talk about some of the structural realities of that way of life, which included deep intergenerational community, much deeper connections between the old and the young, between male and female, masculine and feminine, between humans and animals, between humans and plants. A sense of deep interrelatedness came partly from the way of life, and the Buddhist teachings reinforce that. And what I'm trying to teach in the West is that we should look at the whole package. So I'm trying to share a holistic view that is more embodied and more practical. So it's not just about the teachings and an intellectual appreciation. It's not just about meditation. It's also about how can we live differently? How can we really learn in a whole-bodied way? Right. And a lot of it has to do with realizing that we've made this sort of progress, which was actually taking us away from nature. And in so doing, it was taking us away from our own nature. There's a huge shift towards really measuring and understanding how important it is for us not to just rest in our left-sided intellectual, analytical brain, but actually allow the wholeness of our perception. And all of these therapies now that really work for trauma are becoming more and more prevalent. And they're just one of the many ways that I see a type of ancient futures trend. In other words, we're learning from the ancients and taking it into our future.
And what is your definition of happiness?
Well, first of all, it's very interesting. I want to say that very early on, when I had been spending 2 years basically living with the Ladakhis.
Yes.
Maybe I should also tell you how that happened. You know, I was living in Paris. I was working as a linguist. I was very sort of cosmopolitan. I lived in many different countries. I spoke a lot of languages. And I had traveled to remote cultures also, but I wasn't, you know, particularly interested in Asia or these cultures. But I was invited by as part of an anthropological German film team that wanted to go to this part of Tibet that had just been opened up to the Western world. The westernmost part of Tibet belongs politically to India and is called Ladakh. Yes. And it's actually West Tibet, you know, the Dalai Lama is the spiritual head and so on. And I was, at first, I wasn't that interested, but when I realized that this was one place that had been sealed off for political reasons, so it was really untouched by the modern world, I decided to go along, and I thought I would be there for 6 weeks. Well, I arrived as we crossed the Himalayas from India, from Kashmir, go over the high part. We came into this unbelievably beautiful landscape, first of all. It was a very barren area, but you had these high peaks with white, glistening glaciers, and then the mountains were amazing colors in green and purple, and then you had almost like Sahara-like sand dunes, and then these villages that were brilliant green. You know, in the summer they would irrigate the desert basically from the glaciers, and so you had these amazing, brilliant green fields, and then also with lavender growing. So you had this. Anyway, it was an artist landscape. And then the architecture was, you know, you had 3-story houses painted white and with beautiful wooden balconies. it just seemed like a Shangri-La. And then when we met the people, they were just radiant with smiles. There was just such an amazing lightness of being. And I just fell in love, immediately fell in love. And then at the end of the filming, just before that, I met a professor from the School of Oriental and African Studies who was very impressed with how much of the language I had already learned in 6 weeks, because I became so attracted to the people and I enjoyed learning languages. So I picked up a lot of the language. Yes. And then, I was told I could do a PhD on the language. So that allowed me to stay. So I ended up actually staying for 2 years, partly because I had an accident and tore the ligament in my ankle, and then I also got hepatitis when I was in Delhi and still working with Ladakhis. But anyway, after these 2 years, the most striking thing of all was this remarkable, radiant lightness of being, the humor, I had never ever experienced people who were so happy and who were so open and who never ever said in those early years, "Oh, we're so poor and backward, can you help us?" They would say, "Have you tasted all our delicious food?" And it's just, they were very content with life.
Yeah.
So when I went back to Sweden, one of the most striking things, I say back to Sweden, I'm originally Swedish, but it was particularly striking in Sweden that there was an epidemic of depression and a lot of unhappiness. And so my main lesson for, almost forever has been about happiness.
Yes.
And interestingly enough, in the early years, a lot of people would just say, "Well, how do you know what's happy? How do you know they were happy? Is there such a thing as happiness?" And I would always say, I think each and every one of us knows that there is such a thing as happiness and unhappiness. We know what it feels like when we're not feeling happy, and we've had a taste of feeling happy or happier. Absolutely. And so I was, laying out what I saw were the key elements. Why were people so much happier? Why were people so unhappy in Sweden? And the main thing that appeared was that people were far too isolated. We had been trained into believing we don't need anybody. We're fine on our own. And because we were taken on this path away from nature and from more land-based ways of living, we were also taken away from a more extended social fabric, from a more extended family, more connections to our neighbors, more local interdependence. So we weren't dependent on each other anymore. In fact, we were dependent on these distant institutions, on government and actually big business behind them. And we had no idea where our food came from. We had no idea, who we actually depended on. And so part of my teaching, became, we need to reconnect. We need to reestablish our interdependence with each other and with nature. And that's what localization is about. For me, the big message is that, particularly after COVID, we have now a choice of which path into the future to support. It's about reconnection, deep reconnection to life. It's an inner reconnection as well. It's the reconnection between mind, heart, and body. And as we start listening more to the wholeness, even of our own lives, and then reconnect and do that with the rest of life, we feel so much happier and we become so much stronger and we become healthier and happier. I think most people want that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us on Tita Talks. Thank you for discussing the healing power of personal, social, and ecological well-being, a self-care tool for you.
Thank you, Tita, for doing this work. It's wonderful that you're doing it.
Thank you.